Hi, I'm Derek Hashan. Welcome to the stream. This is our daily pre-show. We're here, we have an opportunity to talk about some of what is going on in the world. We're going to go live on television in just a few. And remember, we have our post-show following the main broadcast, where we're going to go deeper into some of the issues that have come up, as well as potentially into some new things. Today, I'm happy to be joined by Zia Moral. Ahmed is with us as always. Both Ahmed and I were out last week, so it's great to see you, great to be back. Lots of things going on this past week, but one of them that was really interesting that's being discussed online is this issue of these Saudi terror laws, or the proposed law. Ahmed, can you break down a little bit what that's all about?
Right, so the story emerged, I guess, a couple days ago, but lots of people have been talking about it on Twitter. We have the story on our website. Basically, Amnesty International said that there's proposed legislation in Saudi Arabia that's threatening to not only strangle the peaceful dissent that we see, kind of flourishing, we could say, so to speak, in the Gulf Kingdom, but that it could really be problematic for people who want to have any sort of voice of dissent across any spectrum. The Saudis are saying this has been around for 5 to 6 years. They're only fine-tuning it. I know you were following this story, but there's a lot of people in Saudi who are tweeting to us, including a hashtag, I think, that says no. There's Saudi terror law is the hashtag to follow the story, but then there's one, I had it somewhere here, where they're basically urging people to vote against it because the vote has yet to happen.
Exactly, and it's quite a dangerous proposal as well, because what it tries to do is to codify a series of exemptions given to the executive branch, to the police force, to everybody, to really commit serious human rights abuses. And that's where the problem begins. It uses the language of terror, whereas actually what it's trying to curb down is democratic expressions and social freedoms, which everybody should enjoy.
Well, that I think hits it right on the head, because one of the things that I saw in an article in the Washington Post was saying that, well, they've blocked all kinds of things historically, but now they've taken this additional step of actually blocking, we're talking about blocking things online, they've blocked the Amnesty International website because Amnesty International criticized this law. And what they're arguing is that this particular law can criminalize certain kinds of what we would traditionally consider to be democratic dissent. Do you think that maybe this is a result of the Arab Spring?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We've seen, protests where women are trying to fight against the ban on driving. We've even done the story about consumer prices going up for milk for the big company Al Marai, and within 2 weeks they reversed that and brought the price down. But I think, what you were saying, frankly, reminds me a little bit, though very different because the context is different, of the Patriot Act, where they're curbing on civil liberties and to a certain
Absolutely.
extent.
I mean, I think it always comes to this issue of security or freedom, and it's as if you have to have a trade there. You've got the Patriot Act in the United States, which did allow the government radically new, expanded powers of surveillance and things like that. You also had, we talked about this just a few weeks ago, this law in Israel that criminalizes any sort of support or any idea of boycott in the country, whereby somebody could basically allege that you have called for boycott or used boycott language of my product or service, and without proving damages, I could still take you to court. And so it seems like Saudi is on a very similar track.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning, Nawara82 alerted me to this story, even though I know people have been talking about it, and she even included this screenshot showing that you can no longer access Amnesty International's website, as you said, on the website. But she also was telling us that there's this, as I said, and I just want to show it here, this new, basically this new tweet that's a hashtag, forgive me, called Shura Vote No. So she's saying, as far as I know, there was a hashtag Shura Vote No, asking the council to vote no on the newly proposed law.
But of course, what the Shura vote would mean, and whether or not it will actually stop the codification of this policy, and even if this law is not taken as an official legislative decision in practice, it still signals that the kingdom is in panic over controlling its population. It is acutely aware that all the tensions in the region will affect it, and what it's trying to do is, by using seemingly a legitimate language of combating with terror, it's curbing freedoms.
Yeah. So, I mean, I want to just expand it again, because it seems so intriguing to me that you will look at a country like Saudi Arabia, has obviously got significant disagreements with Israel. You look at the United States, which purports to be a paragon of freedom and democracy, And you'll see examples in all of these nations of using the issue of security to diminish people's political freedoms. How effective can that be in a world where we have so much access to information and it seems so transparent what they're trying to do?
But that's the tension which the sovereign rulers in every country are finding themselves in. On one hand, they want to maintain their power, which will give them the breathing space to combat the security issues which they see as needed to combat it. And yet at the same time, they're acutely aware that under international law, they are limited in what they can do. And the civil society and the social media keeps them accountable. So then the only option that is left to them is to use language that makes it sound legitimate. And that's the sinister attempt to use human rights talk to undermine human rights itself.
I just want to read a couple quick tweets out on the subjects, touching on all the subjects we were just talking about. Nawara saying, if the U.S. Patriot Act and Bahrain's state of security law got married and had a baby, it would be the new proposed Saudi terror law. And she's also saying, just so people understand actually what this law means, now with the proposed law, which Amnesty says they were able to leak a version of, the new Saudi terror law, you no longer need a search warrant to enter or search a home. And also, it essentially gives the Ministry of Interior absolute power over the judicial system.
Wow, that's heavy duty. I mean, they're obviously really stressed out. I actually want to segue briefly to another topic that we're going to discuss during the main broadcast, and that is this hashtag Blame the Muslims. And we're actually lucky because in a few minutes we're going to be talking with the young woman at Strange Sanam, I think. Sunam, who is going to be discussing why she started it in response to, speculation that this was a Muslim who had committed these vile acts in Norway. And actually you can see her on our Skype screen just now. She can't hear us, but she's going to be live in just a few. But the interesting thing is people took it seriously. I mean, I saw people over the weekend, some were actually like, yeah, I blame the Muslims for this, like seriously saying it, even though she started it as something satirical. And others were like, why were you going to blame the Muslims? People were really stirred, and it was trending worldwide.
Look, even official Khaled seems to have misunderstood her intention, saying blame the Muslim is the most ignorant trending topic I've ever seen on Twitter, appalled at how disgusting and disrespectful people are these days, clearly thinking that her intention was to blame Muslims, not to highlight the bias against Muslims.
Well, she sparked quite a conversation.
She did, and I'm glad she did, because it did reflect back on us, our own prejudices. We failed to understand what happened in Norway. We instinctively responded to the events and to her tweet.
And we jumped to a conclusion. So I can't wait to hear what she's got to say, and we hope that you'll stick with us. We're about to go live on air, and we'll be hearing from her shortly. Tweet us at AJStream, join the conversation. Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now in the stream. We're a social media community with our own daily TV show right here on Al Jazeera English. We're bringing you stories that are ongoing, global, and sourced from social media. Today, got a problem? Why not blame a Muslim? And could a political spring be starting in Turkey's Kurdish community? Ahmed Shihab Eldin, our digital producer, is here bringing us your feedback. On the couch with us today is Zia Mural, a sociologist, author, and blogger on Turkish affairs. Zia, great to have you here.
Great to be here, Derek.
Tell us a little bit about the kind of stuff that you work on.
Well, I do research on ethnic and religious violence and its prevention. So that takes me across the Middle East and some parts of Africa. Really try to understand what's happening and what we can do to address it.
Now, I know you work specifically on Egypt and Nigeria. What kind of things are you looking at in those countries?
Well, in both of these countries, we see clashes between Muslim and Christian groups, and the news of every incident has been taken up by the international media and often portrayed as a religious clash between Muslims and Christians, which looks inevitable. So what I'm really trying to do is to understand how do these things happen, why do they happen, and what can be done to really stop these.
So perhaps what are some of the underpinnings that may go beyond even religion?
Exactly, in economic factors, political factors, grievances, or even the temperature, even food crisis, or the prices of the gas, and all of the things that actually makes it attention.
That's fascinating. Well, we're really happy to have you here. We'll hope you come back as we cover those kinds of topics.
Definitely.
But it's great to have you here because we're going to be talking about Turkey in just a minute. if we want to know what kind of stories you're following as well. So please tell them to us. Use the hashtag AJStream. If you do so, you could wind up right here on the stream.
So here's one hashtag you're sharing with us, and in fact, it's trending worldwide. Blame the Muslims. That's exactly what many are accusing security experts and pundits of doing as the news broke out about the bombing and shootings in Norway. Late on Friday, many in the mainstream media suggested the attacks looked like the work of Al-Qaeda. Now, the New York Times and other major US outlets quoted faulty intelligence from the Jihadika website, which referenced a group calling themselves Ansar al-Jihad al-Alami, or Helpers of the Global Jihad, as having claimed credit for the attacks. But just 2 hours after the bombing, Twitter users circulated eyewitness accounts from Utoya saying the shooter was a blonde Norwegian-speaking man. As you can see right here, this tweet, Rune Hakonsen saying arrested man is blonde, Nordic, and goes on to say this is sourced from TV2. Now, still, pundits argued that Norway could be an Al-Qaeda target because of its role in Afghanistan and Libya, and even because Norwegian authorities indicted a controversial Muslim cleric on terror charges earlier. Now, this is the image of Anders Breivik, a white supremacist who admitted to the bombing and shooting rampage, claiming that he was trying to save Europe from Islam. But the immediate suspicion of an Islamic link angered many, including a Muslim woman who in London created the hashtag Blame the Muslims to highlight biases against Muslim communities around the world. She said, "I started the Blame the Muslims trend to highlight how ridiculous it is to blame Muslims for every problem in the world." And she went on to say in May there was a bomb scare at King's Cross Station in London. The IRA was to blame. Everyone's first reaction, she asks, blame the Muslims. So much so that people started responding, saying we had a shooting at the Holocaust Museum in Washington by an anti-Semitic Christian. Who was blamed first, he asks, and it's blame the Muslims. Now, eventually the whole world was tweeting this hashtag. And right now, joining us from London is the woman behind the hashtag, Blame the Muslims, Sanoom Ghafoor. Welcome to the stream.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Just very briefly, why did you start this hashtag, and why is everyone tweeting it?
Right, I started this because as soon as the horrid attacks happened, everyone was so quick to blame the Muslims, from Sky News to Fox News. They all wanted to blame the Muslims. Fox News even went as far as saying it seems Muslim extremists once again. So Fox News, a news channel who, by the way, their slogan is fair and balanced. So straight away, everyone went to blame the Muslims. And it seems they're targeted for everything. So a singer, Amy Winehouse, died the other day. So I thought that with the whole blame the Muslim things, Muslims might even get blamed for her death. So I took to Twitter and started tweeting blame the Muslims.
So not everybody in the world understands that you were, trying to highlight the bias. They're saying blame them. One guy saying, official Khalid, saying it's the most ignorant trending topic he's ever seen on Twitter, and he's appalled at how disgusting and disrespectful people are these days. What's going on?
Well, I think there were a number of diverse people participating in the trending topic. Some that were initially outraged at the fact that Muslims were blamed was a trending topic globally without actually understanding it. Then there were people actually tweeting, supporting the Muslims. Then there were those who understood the tweets and actually understood it, and they were supporting the Muslims as well. And then there were those who, unfortunately and unsurprisingly, they genuinely were hating on the Muslims and using as an excuse to hate on the Muslims.
As there are always haters. So Zia, what do you think of this quickly?
Well, I'm really glad Sanoom started that, and I think what she did was a perfect reflection of all of the prejudices we have. While we're trying to understand a completely complex world, we're all dying to find a scapegoat, which is so neat and tidy, and you can clearly say. And I think what Sanoom did really unwittingly and wittingly is to reflect back that intellectual failure for us, which has real life consequences, that you completely ostracize millions of people who are Muslims around the world.
Just one quote that came to us from someone who sent us a Storify said that perhaps social media has revolutionized the time frame in which information is disseminated, so much so that the mainstream media overeager to keep the edge, are going with information that's viral before it's confirmed. Do you think there's a risk in that?
There was not even a viral information as such about how the attack in Norway happened and who did it. It was an assumption which everybody was on TV and commenting on it. And that's where the problem is.
And to your point, and what I think is what's special about her is, you know, that hashtag, it pulled off the face of the kind of bias that is oftentimes in this coverage, and that's accepted. It's like, there's been an attack, it looks like terrorism.
Blame the Muslims.
Blame the Muslims.
So, Sanam, what do you plan to do with all this attention?
Well, firstly, I want to highlight the fact that Muslims aren't always to blame. If it was a Muslim, you'd know the media would take it as they did. They'd say Islam, terrorists, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, Muslims, terrorists, and calling it an Al-Qaeda massacre. I think with this, I'd like to highlight that problems aren't always caused by Muslims. They called the shooter a mad bomber and a monster. So I'd like to highlight that it had nothing to do with his religion. Like Hosni Mubarak, he didn't represent Islam for the last 30 years. George Bush didn't represent Christianity when he invaded Iraq, the same way this man didn't represent Christianity when he began shooting people.
Well, thanks, Sanam, so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So that's just one of the stories you're feeding the stream with. And here are some of the stories we are also watching.
What was supposed to be a celebration of Mediterranean culture and unity got heated during a performance by a popular Kurdish artist. This particular image is of Aynur Doğan, who was forced off an Istanbul stage when the crowd began booing and throwing things at her. They were upset because she was performing in Kurdish, and we should mention that this jazz concert is an annual event that attracts an elite Kurdish audience. Initially, the incident was ignored by the mainstream Turkish media and was only being talked about online. Ashley Tunk, a social media professor who attended the concert and actually live tweeted the event, gave us this account of what happened.
Aynur Doğan came to the stage and she sang like 2 songs, but we realized that the applause was very weak, unlike to the other singers. So at the very beginning of the 3rd song, a man actually close to the front row shouted at her, asking her to sing in Turkish. But she actually continued to sing in Kurdish. Well, she's a very well-known singer anyway. She sings in Kurdish. And at this moment, there was an incredible boo, and a lot of people were, booing her. And actually, before that, there are a lot of people left the concert in anger. At that point, those people actually threw plastic bottles and pillows to the stage. And then she had to leave. At that moment, a group of people at the back row began to sing the national anthem.
Now, the day before this event, 13 Turkish soldiers were killed in the predominantly Kurdish city of Diyarbakir. So tensions between ethnic Turks and Kurds were already high that night. But this Kurdish issue in Turkey goes back decades. Ethnic Kurds account for roughly 20% of the Turkish population, yet Kurdish rights advocates say they suffered discrimination at the hands of the state. In the 1980s, Kurdish separatists launched an insurgency movement under the banner of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK. That conflict has thus far claimed some 40,000 lives. In recent years, there was hope for a political solution, but since June, the situation has become more tense as some Kurdish MPs have refused to take their seats in the Turkish parliament. So, could all of this culminate in some sort of political spring for Turkey's Kurds? Joining us now from Istanbul is Hamza Aktan, a freelance journalist and blogger of Kurdish descent. Previously, he worked as a correspondent and editor for the news website Biyanet. Hamza, welcome to the stream. We also have with us, as we saw before, Zia, who is of Turkish descent. Hamza, let me begin with you. Given that before this particular night, 13 Turkish soldiers were killed, some are alleging that the PKK was involved. Is it not understandable that ethnic Turks would be upset?
Well, in some ways it's understandable, but I mean the whole tension, the current tension and the hatred environment in Turkey is actually, as you said, is a result of the Turkish government's last 30 years policies. I mean, the Turkish government has always been using all the tools, including media, education, religion, against the Kurdish uprising, against the Kurdish insurgency since the very beginning of 80s until now. And as a result of this whole process, now the Turks in Western Turkey are full of negative perceptions regarding the Kurds. In order to understand the scale of the current tension, really, we have to look at some figures. I just want to share some figures from a very recently published report by a Turkish research company, Konda. The research suggests that 57% of the Turks don't want to be married with a Kurd. It's quite shocking figure. 53% of the Turks don't want to have a Kurdish co-partner in business. And 47% don't want to have a Kurdish neighbor. So that environment is quite big, and we have seen impacts of this environment even in Istanbul, which has a huge Kurdish population. More than 4 million Kurds live in Istanbul, and we have seen some clashes between the especially ultra-nationalist Turkish mobs and some Kurdish residents of the city.
Hamza, I want to get some response from Zia to that point. He's saying that basically there is a sense of ethnocentrism among Turks. Is that fair?
Sure, and the numbers, the Konda is a really respected research company, but I think what Hamza is omitting in the same data that he read was if it's 47% of Turks did not want a Kurdish neighbor, that leaves out the remaining 53% of Turks who are actually want to be with their Kurdish neighbors. I think the old days of seeing Turkey in this really clear black and white aspect of, well, the Turks in the West hates the Kurds in the East versus the Kurds in the East hates the Turks in the West. And I think that's what people like Hamza and me and others have to break down and say, we are no more in where we were even 15 years ago. Yes, all the problems are still there. And yes, the Turkish state has failed. And yes, Kurdish politicians have failed. And yes, our generation has failed to address this. But there are positive signs side by side with all of the recent incidents.
Now, I want to show the both of you one more clip from Asli Tunç. This is a very interesting statement that she made about how she felt having seen the incident at this particular concert.
But the important thing here is not the laws, the social fabric of the society. I mean, how people react to that, how, you know, this discriminatory, this intolerance, actually, the level of intolerance is increasing every day. And the tension, you know, they cannot even stand the Kurdish, even in songs. This is quite scary, I think.
So,
well, it's yes and no, and I think, you know, I'm not even denying the problem, and I think it is true. But to say that the tensions are increasing, people can't stand Kurdish songs, kind of is contradictory, because now we have Kurdish singers singing in Kurdish in public, and not every Turk who went to Aynur Doğan's concert. I have her CDs. I listened to her albums. So, you know, while we are criticizing this dangerous trend, we also have to put it in a context of saying, actually, now you can teach Kurdish. Now we have official state channels airing in Turkish, and now there is a growing mainstream middle ground where people are really proud of the ethnic mosaic of the country. This does not take away the problems, as Hamza mentioned, but this puts it in a context that what we see in terms of social attitudes is actually a maturation and complication.
I want to get Hamza's thoughts on this, because right now I have in front of my screen some images of men who are basically praying outside. And the reason they're praying outside is a kind of protest. Hamza, can you speak to us a little bit about the nature of this protest and how people feel about these issues of openness within Turkish society?
Sure. Well, as a result of the wrong handling of the Kurdish uprising from the government, this belief and this connection among the Kurds has been rising in huge levels. And therefore, the Kurds have created their own way of politics, their own way of life in the Kurdish region of Turkey. And since the beginning of this year, Kurds started to pray outside of the mosque, as they believe that the state is actually using the religion and using the imams to basically crack down, to change perceptions on the PKK, on the other Kurdish movements like the Peace and Democracy Party. So as a kind of new way of campaign, and it was actually inspired by the Arab Spring, the Kurds started to pray, especially the Friday prayers outside of the mosques.
So, Ahmed?
Yeah, on Twitter, there's a lively discussion about this. Sudanese thinker is saying, do Turks acknowledge that their fellow Kurdish countrymen have legitimate demands and grievances, or are they in denial? Now, we had someone answer him, Seda Ershan, saying, Turks do realize this. We are not in denial, but we are not willing to give up our land for Kurdistan Kurds to live all over. So maybe to you, is this a generational thing?
Well, I think, look, this is not just a simple failure of Turks and Kurds, and I think there's a genuine failure of communication and really trying to hear all of the groups and the complexity of the issue. And I think our generation, I'm a Turk, I have failed actually listening to the Kurdish concerns. Mm-hmm. It's only much after when the Turkish state has lifted the state of emergency in eastern Turkey, the grotesque abuses Kurdish citizens of Turkey suffered came to our attention, because we did not know. Right. But yet at the same time, the Kurdish activists and Kurdish politicians have to find creative and genuine ways to actually communicate their grievances in a way which does not touch the buttons in the Turkish society, that what they want is an independent country.
So actually, let me get Hamza to respond to that. I mean, is that what the Kurdish people are looking for? And let me also ask you, how much support is there for the PKK within the Kurdish community? The Turks see them as a terrorist group.
Well, that's another problem that the Turks or the Turkish government are considering the PKK as a terrorist organization. It's actually a kind of insurgency.
Well, that's debatable. I mean, both the EU and the United States also classify PKK as a terror organization, and there's a legitimate reason for that.
That's another problem, because if you consider a movement as a terrorist, you can't really
read. It is an armed movement. It's not a political movement. It is an armed group that has been, expressing guerrilla warfare. It is not a political movement.
For sure, absolutely. But all the insurgencies, or many insurgencies, are actually backed by armed groups. It's not something
in
like...
In the previous century, that's where the problem is. The 21st century demands a completely new set of Kurdish activism. And the fact that we have the 1960s, 70s charm about Che Guevara t-shirt wearing, communist, Marxist, Leninist language using guerrillas has already died down. That's in fact where the blockade of this conversation is. We need new Kurdish voices and politicians to develop a new movement.
But
let me tell you this. The problem is actually this in Turkey. The Turkish government or the Turkish figures, parties, especially nationalist parties, do not consider the PKK or other pro-PKK organizations as legitimate representatives of the Kurds. However, the reality on the ground is quite different. The public support for the pro-PKK or other political parties, pro-Kurdish parties, is quite high in the Kurdish region, and therefore, as a quite prominent journalist, Cengiz Çandar, recently suggested to the Turkish government after interviewing with both the Turkish President Abdullah Gül and other Turkish ministers and leaders of the PKK, leaders of the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq, he concluded that in order to reach a peaceful solution, the first step should be a reconsideration and consider the PKK as an insurgency. Otherwise, you can't really compromise with a terrorist organization. And if you do so, in 2009, the Turkish government started an initiative called the Kurdish Initiative. However, it failed because of that perception.
Yes. Hamza, let me jump in for a quick second, because we were speaking in the pre-show about these Saudi terror laws, and we were talking about how any issue, when you put security on it, when you say there's something to combat terrorism, then it reduces the need for accountability for human rights. Could an argument be made from the Kurdish perspective that this designation of PKK as a terror organization precludes any further conversation?
Sure. I think the designation of the Kurdish concerns in Turkey as a terrorism issue and security issue does that exactly. That's in fact why the Turkish state has not seen the signs and has not been able to solve the issue, because it only solved the Kurdish issue as a security concern and passed laws which are terror laws to handle that. And that I completely agree. The Turkish state has to engage with multiplicity of Kurdish voices. In fact, the Turkish state is officially engaging with Abdullah Öcalan, the head of PKK, who is in counter detention in Turkey.
Now, I want you to continue your thought, but before we do, I want to take a quick look, draw your attention to my screen. What we see here is an actual recent nationalist march. And this is nationalist Turks, and they're making some very strong anti-Kurdish statements here. In this particular instance, just before what we're seeing, you could hear glass breaking, the police have come out, and people are very, very agitated. So I want you to speak a little bit more about what the government is doing, but the specific question that I have for you is the government actually stoking these kinds of heated sentiments amongst the Turkish people?
Yes and no. So the government is guilty of using a nationalistic sentiment in response to the recent attacks. There are so many questions about whether or not these attacks are even done by PKK, or who initiated the Zeytinburnu incidents, which we see on TV, or the clear examples of people coming from outside to take part of Istanbul to create the havoc. So the government is failing in the sense that it's still sticking to the old language of seeing this as a security threat and reacting in a national sentiment. And that is true. Yet at the same time, if there is any government we had for the last 10 years who can actually take positive steps on it, is still the AKP government, because they have the biggest mandate, 50% of the votes, and they have genuinely previously shown desire to address this issue. But this issue is an ongoing social tension, and it cannot simply be expressed in terms of security or state performance. It is the job of Kurdish and Turkish civil society groups to genuinely stand together and say, well, let's talk. And I think that will start when the Kurdish party, BDP, the Kurdish MPs who are protesting in the Turkish parliament, when they return to the Turkish parliament, then they can take their seats.
So let me ask you, Hamza, we have a very limited amount of time. In 15 seconds or less, do you believe that these issues can be resolved?
Well, it can be, and all the responsibility basically is on the AKP government. However, it hasn't really shown positive signs that it is really willing to reach a peaceful solution. And
Hamza, I'm sorry, I have to stop you right there. We're about to go. Is it all on the AKP?
Well, yes and no. No, not really. It's all on all of us, the entire country.
Yeah. Thank you both for coming, for having such a respectful dialogue. We really appreciate it. Stay with us in the post show. We're going to wrap up this particular topic, and we're also going to be talking about some other things in the region, specifically in Lebanon. Join us at stream.aljazeera.com for our post show. Remember, you can tweet us using the hashtag AJStream. We'll see you online. Hi, welcome to the Post Show. This is where we get a chance to dive deeper into this issue. We're lucky to have two people from Turkey joining us today. One ethnic Turkish, one ethnic Kurdish. It's a significant conflict that's still happening there, and we want to get a little bit more insight. I want to go back to Hamza briefly. Hamza, to close out the show, we asked the question of, are you hopeful? And you made a strong statement. You said, yes, you're hopeful. However, it is entirely up to the AKP government. I want to challenge that for a minute. How can there be hope for any peace if you believe that it's for the other side to make movements? What do you believe could be done on the Kurdish side?
Well, first of all, I actually just want the international community know the real scale of the handling of the AK government. To see that, and again, I will quote a very recently published report. It says between 2002 and 2009, which means the AKP era, there has been 53,000 trials against Kurdish dissidents. And in these trials, 192,000 Kurds have been accused, 87,000 of them have been sentenced.
How does that compare to prior to the AKP era? Are you saying that there's been more trials of Kurds, or is it less?
Before the AK government, especially in the 90s, it was in the most tense time, the Kurdish problem. There were more than 17,000 of disappearances by security forces, by Turkish security forces. However, in the last decade, we haven't seen such developments. However,
so wouldn't that be counted as progress?
Not really.
Well, no,
you can't really be. You can't easily be satisfied with not being murdered by state forces. You know, you have legitimate citizenship rights. You have legitimate human rights, and you wouldn't easily be satisfied with not being in a huge conflict environment.
I want to get a couple of tweets in because our online community has a lot, and then Zia, we're going to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
I saw you were going to respond, so I'll lead you up to it perhaps. But Hamza, just to counter what you were saying, you know, a lot of people online, or several people, including Said Fateh, saying, as a Kurdish Turk, I must say that a lot has changed in the last years for the better for the Kurds. Yet, though we are still far away. And then Imanje saying, the Turks, unlike other countries, as you were just alluding to, with the Kurds, offer them at the very least equal rights as a citizen of their country, unlike in other countries nearby. Including,
well, I think the two things, dear Hamza. You did not answer Derek's question in regards to what Kurds can do to solve this problem. You jumped on the bandwagon or right away blaming everything on the Turkish government. The second thing is, and I think you rightfully pointed out, that 10 years ago, you and I would not even be able to be on TV debating this, and you clearly live in Turkey. Not just Kurdish voices who wrote about this, but even Turkish voices who were condemning state performance will get imprisoned, tortured, and disappeared. So we have to put that in the context that actually we have come a long way last 5 years. Is this enough? It is not enough. But is the solution to that problem Kurdish romanticism over declaring democratic independence of a new country, or is it actually the Kurdish politicians joining the Turkish parliament and saying, yes, let's write the new constitution, yes, let's make Turkish law robust, yes, let's advance democracy in Turkey, and let's ensure that Turkey upholds its obligations under European Convention of Human Rights. But that's not what I'm hearing from the Kurdish politicians.
I have to again say, we are in Turkey, we are still not free of speaking or discussing the whole aspect of...
You are speaking in Turkey. You are speaking in Turkey at the moment, Hamza. You have to put it in a context.
Well, Mr. Meral, I mean, my own brother, my own journalist brother, Irfan Aktan, last year was sentenced to 1 year and 3 months jail for only quoting 2 sentences of a PKK member. So it's not... I don't think it's not an open environment to really discuss the whole aspects of the issue. And again, many journalists are being prosecuted, many writers, many politicians are being accused of...
Yeah, you're right in raising those, but I'm just trying to put it in a context.
We absolutely are not in a free environment, and if I speak more openly, even in this program, I may be in danger of being prosecuted by Turkish law.
Hamza, let me actually give some additional context to that, because Reporters Without Borders is saying that Turkey ranks 138th out of 178 countries for press freedom. So doesn't Hamza have a point that whereas some things may have changed, perhaps it's not possible to have a truly open dialogue about this?
The issue of press freedom in Turkey is a serious concern, but not just about the Kurdish issue. The arrests of journalists and anybody who published is a growing concern. We had some of these are because of the nationalist or deep state group trials that are continuing, where some journalists who were involved in a coup attempt to overthrow the government has been arrested. Some has just been accused with no genuine case against them. And yes, Kurdish voices are in prison. And that's one thing we have to genuinely combat against. And that is very true.
Just quickly.
You know, before we do, I'm going to thank you, Hamza, for joining us. We really appreciate you being a part of this conversation. Do you want to leave us with a final brief word?
Please, yes. Well, actually, the problem in Turkey is not only the pressure on the freedom of expression. The problem is also the coverage of the Turkish mainstream media. The mainstream media has been feeding all nationalist field on Turks, and also we don't really have a huge or wide coverage of the Kurdish problem internally. And one more point I would like to say regarding the international media. The international media has also been neglecting the Kurdish issue in Turkey, including Al Jazeera network. We haven't seen a kind of wide interest of Al Jazeera network on the Kurdish region, despite many huge clashes, despite many violations of human rights, and etc. And I would like to urge all international media to have more and more interest on the Kurdish issue, because it's a big problem in not only for all the region, for the Middle East.
Thank you, Hamza, very much for that. And hopefully this conversation can be a part of opening up the doors for deeper conversations. Thank you for joining us, Hamza.
Thank you.
Ahmed?
You know, there were a couple things I wanted to bring up, but just to quickly answer what Hamza's point was, you know, the Turkish nationalist rally in a Kurdish city, we covered this in June, and Al Jazeera has been covering it in May. Again, Turkey's killings triggering Kurdish protests. But we did see, so we will be covering these stories, but we did see that there was a lot of reports that the press freedom in Turkey, as you said, was very low, but also...
And you actually, I think you had a
tweet?
No, I saw you had a page, a website about, I think it was on the press freedom issue.
I did, and unfortunately it has eluded me. I don't know how much time we have, but there we go. Here it is. It was just this one tweet that I wanted to read, or this one section rather. The European Union criticizing Turkey in his defense, which is I think the point he was trying to make. This is in 2010. The European Union broadly criticized Turkey's press freedom record and its annual assessment of the country's now lagging accession bid for the EU. Saying in November of last year that the Turkish law insufficiently guarantees free expression. So perhaps that's the point he was making, that he doesn't feel even in Turkey that he can speak freely, which I think you were saying he can.
I agree. All of these are genuine problems we have to combat. The only thing I was coming back against was putting it in a context.
Yeah.
Saying where we were 10 years ago versus where we are now is a tremendous improvement. Is this enough? Not at all. Let's dream for the next 10 years and let's shift our gears for a whole new politics, for a whole new discourse. And that's actually what I'm critical of. Not the problems he's raising, but what I'm critical is the solutions that are being talked about.
I want to, sorry, go
ahead.
Well, I want to actually expand, because Hamza is no longer with us, I don't want to get deeper into the issue, because it is a very sensitive issue. We want to have both sides able to contribute. But there is something else that was raised for us that was really interesting, and this is actually in Lebanon, and it was a music video that we found that was talking about how workers are treated, domestic workers in particular, are treated in Lebanon. And we're going to warn our viewers, there is some very strong and mature language in this video. It's in Arabic, so we're not going to play those segments. And when you go to watch it on our website, please be advised, don't let your children hear what's being said, but you should check it out because they're making a strong argument. However, if you take a look at my screen, you'll see the song, one of the clips in it says, 21-year-old domestic worker dies after drinking poisonous liquid. Let's have a listen to a little bit more of it. Now, I'm going to let this run a little bit longer in the background, and in order to give us some more insight into this issue of how domestic workers are treated in Lebanon, we have joining us now via Skype a very special guest. And let me just check my notes to make sure I will have their name correctly pronounced. It's Farah Salka from the Migrant Workers Task Force. I know the screen is a little bit dark, but Farah, we're so happy to have you joining us. Thank you very much for being with us in the stream. Tell us a little bit about the situation facing migrant workers in Turkey.
In Lebanon.
In Lebanon, pardon me. I've got Turkey on the mind, right?
Yeah. No problem.
Exactly. Go ahead.
It's not on news for you, but the situation of migrant domestic workers in Lebanon, specifically domestic workers, is really bad. There are many dozens and thousands of those people who are treated in slave-like conditions in Lebanon. They have no rights whatsoever. There's no law that protects them. They're not included in the Lebanese labor law and many other issues. To summarize the situation for you in short, I can tell you that a Human Rights Watch report that was produced in 2008 shows that there's an average a case of 1 suicide per week in Lebanon. And I say suicide, but they're not always suicides. We all know that. So this is in short the situation. But the issue is not only that. The issue is the fact that this situation is coupled by a very, very high, intense level of racism in Lebanon towards domestic workers, migrant workers, and many other communities, Palestinians, Syrians, etc. So it comes with a whole big package, and after that comes the fact that there's so much indifference from people towards all the situation.
Well, Farah, I mean, there seems to be more than just indifference. The reason we came across this particular story is because of the launch of a new program that is designed to allegedly train workers. For $180, you can get your domestic worker in a 4-day program to train them to be a better worker. And we actually saw in response a Madam and Mr. Training Academy that says here on my screen, 80% of maids cannot go outside on their day off, 34% not given even 1 day off of a week. Do you treat your maid like this? If so, then you qualify for our course on how to be a Madam or Mr. that respects human rights. Is there a disconnect between the perception of how domestic workers should be treated and the reality of their situation?
Yeah, that's very true. The same thing you're talking about, we heard about it like 2 weeks ago, the new idea of the Housekeeper Training Academy, which is sort of very funny and out of this world. I don't really know what this guy was thinking when he came up with this idea. But the situation is like, this guy is proposing to solve this whole situation of slave-like conditions and modern-day slavery in Lebanon. We should train maids and housekeepers and migrant domestic workers on how to become more obedient, more polite, learn how to clean a computer in a careful way, learn how to cook Lebanese food with the right ingredients, rather than actually looking at the problem and the right perception and solving it by giving those people rights to start with. Well, so it's really funny, but it doesn't come as a surprise for me.
I mean, to that point, in the Madam and Minister Training Academy, they make a very strong allegation, which is that 65% of maids report experiencing a, quote, a situation of forced labor, servitude, or slavery. We've seen reports of this sort of thing in various parts of the Middle East.
And those are all documented statistics, yes.
And this is not our first time covering it in Lebanon as well, so it's clearly a problem. Farah, thanks for taking the time for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Zia, it's been a pleasure having you, and thanks for participating in a sensitive conversation. Absolutely. Ahmed, great having you as well. And for our audience, we've got to apologize. We did lose audio for a short amount of time during the main broadcast for our online audience, but we hope that you'll join us again tomorrow for our pre-show at 19:25 GMT. Tweet us at AJ Stream. As always, we will see you online.